Now it's a new adventure. I'm gonna hit end poll. Oh, share results. Okay.
Yes. Oh, that's so exciting. So I'm really delighted to see that so many of you are already talking about climate change at least once a day. It looks like the second most popular answers are either every day, but only to sympathetic people, and then less than once a week. So so that's great information. When you are discussing climate change, what's your biggest concern? And if we could launch the poll for this, please, Sarah. Is it finding the right vocabulary to discuss it? Finding common ground with who you're speaking to? Do you feel like you have a lack of vocabulary to convey the science of climate change? Do you have some kind of general, non-specific fear? It's like you can't articulate it, but you have some underlying undercurrent of fear, or do you have no fear, exclamation point? We'll wait to get the results for that. I'll have some coffee out of my dinosaur mug while we're.
I imagine Lindsay on her bike with her helmet in the no fear category.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just no fear, it's no fear, exclamation point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So so many of you say that your biggest concern is finding common ground with who you're going to be speaking to. And I think that's a very that can be a really big concern, right? Is you need to find something that you have in common with someone to figure out what you might care about. So we'll talk a little bit today about how we can minimize those concerns to maximize our area of common ground. So we have a couple more polls. Is climate change impacting your work on a daily basis? Yes, no, or maybe. And is climate change impacting your life on a daily basis? Yes, no, or maybe. And I apologize. I'm not sure if it's possible to launch more than one poll at once. So they're both on my slide. But we might have to go through two polls. And is your answer going to be the same for both?
We're gonna go through two polls because I had one where they were all loaded up, and that was too much.
Yes. Okay. Almost everyone is saying that climate change is impacting your work on a daily basis. So what about your life? Is climate change impacting your life on a daily basis?
I'm getting ready to launch. You have had fair warning. Launch.
We'll just call you Artemis, Sarah.
Yes. Wonderful to see you today, Dr. Anderson. Or is that like Joshua?
Joshua, War Games.
Yes, and people are saying, so almost everyone is saying that it's impacting their life and work on a daily basis, right? So we have something that almost 70% of us are saying is impacting our work and our lives on a daily basis. But when we did the initial poll of how often we're talking to people about climate change, only about 50% of people said they were regularly talking about that. So today we want to figure out how to try and close that gap, and in, again, a productive, solutions-oriented way. I was actually just talking with a friend who works in climate science over in Southwest Florida last week, and they really expressed a lot of dismay and concern over climate change. And I think when we are not actively working together, it's easy to feel isolated and dismayed by the enormity of our climate change future. So we want to stay away from that. We want to all work together. So something that may be surprising, that this is the results of the Florida Climate Resilience Survey. 90% of Floridians, even including 84% of self-identified Republicans, believe in climate change. So sometimes when we go into a conversation, we might be concerned that the other person doesn't even believe that climate change exists. And how do we navigate that deep of a fear? So when we expand that to the US, it's slightly fewer people than in Florida, but it's still the majority of people. And I'll be using information today from the National Network for Ocean and Climate Change Interpretation. This is some information and slides that they've pulled from the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. Their organization is dedicated to helping give people the tools they need for interpreting climate change. And I'm actually helping them TA a class right now. So it was fun to do this, and it was part of my TA work as well. So even though we believe that climate change is happening, we are rarely discussing climate change with people, right? And we need to talk about climate change in order to actually move the discussion forward and come up with a plan at the community level. So when we're thinking about having a productive climate conversation, there are 3 parts that we need to consider. We need to consider how does climate change work, right? We need to convey the science of climate change in a way that is going to be accessible and memorable to people. We need to convey why it matters. So why does climate change matter? And we need to convey what we can do to help, right? We can't let people walk away from the conversation feeling isolated or having a fatalistic attitude. It's important to stay positive. That's another reason why my slides are so bright. Who can be sad in the face of so much neon pink? So we're going to break into small breakout groups. And what I want you to do is talk within your breakout group about what you might have in common, either regarding your work, regarding something in your community that you're interested in. Try and find that common ground. So if anyone has ever seen Katherine Hayhoe's brilliant TED Talk about communicating climate science, she really emphasizes the need for finding common ground, right? So she talks about a colleague of hers who is an atheist that's talking about how important it is to reach out to churches, right? So it's not that reaching out to churches is not important. It's just that if you are not part of that community, you may not be the most appropriate person to go into that community, right? So I'll have Sara divide us into breakout groups, and we're just going to spend a couple minutes finding one thing we have in common. So Sara, thank you for putting us in the groups.
You're muted, my lovely. You look a little like from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Who's the one that turns purple?
Yeah, I don't think I thought of the I mean, pink is supposed to be a very flattering color for people. So I guess I'm glad I went with this. I do later have a couple of neon green slides. So but I will welcome everyone back from your breakout rooms. In the interest of time, I'm just going to ask one volunteer, if we have anyone who's really eager to share something from their breakout room. I would be delighted to hear about it.
Lindsay, I see a hand.
Yeah, I got partnered with Laura, and turns out we have basically everything in common. So we got to talk about this really cool funding opportunity that she's working towards within the next couple years. Public outreach and education all up and down the Georgia coast for K through 12 programming, and then also some different climate literacy and climate science too.
Oh, very cool. So yeah, it's always great when you find someone where you have a lot of overlap, right, with what they think about and what I don't know what your goals are when we talk about climate change as a problem and think about climate change solutions. So what happens when you maybe struggle to find common ground with someone, or maybe you don't know the person very well? This happens with us at FPAN a lot. How can we reach people and try and set up that common ground without having that when we don't maybe have the chance to have an initial conversation? So I have this picture of a field, and this picture, it's developed by NNOCCI to try and articulate the idea of a cultural mindset, right? So a cultural mindset is, of course, an idea that's passed down from person to person. So it's almost channels our way of thinking. And for Vivica and anyone else who might be coming in from a different country, I apologize because the cultural mindsets that I'll show are very specific and particular to North America. So there may be some overlap, or you may have a better idea of what the specific cultural mindsets that create issues in your home country are. So again, this little path, if you, just like your cultural mindset, if you are walking through this field, you're probably going to choose this little green path here through the field that so many other people have walked, versus striking out on your own and going off through this field at a 45-degree angle. So this is a map of cultural mindsets about social inequities and climate change. So this is created by the Frameworks Institute. So at the end of my talk, I have links to the different materials I'm using. And basically, this breaks down different ideas that people have into different categories, right? So we have nature, science, the economy, and the green in the top of each box is productive or, kind of cultural mindsets we want to encourage or lean into. And then the unproductive mindsets are the red ones, right? And then we have these yellow ones that we want to kind of proceed with caution and try and steer people to the green mindsets. So for an example, for nature, we see that nature is vital to humans. That's an idea we want to lean into. And this idea that something needs to be done about climate change. And we want to try and stay away from the thought that nature will fix itself. So first we'll talk about keeping that in mind with our cultural mindsets. We'll talk about these keys specifically to how to have a productive climate conversation, right? So the first thing I always encourage people to do that I have learned in different interpretation classes on climate change is really talking about how climate change works. Because if people don't understand how something works or don't feel comfortable, they're obviously not going to feel comfortable talking about it, right? So this is from the CLEO Institute. They're a climate interpretation group here in Florida that encourages people to reach out to their community. So when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, we are contributing they release carbon dioxide, and that contributes to the production of greenhouse gases in the environment. And this is problematic because when greenhouse gases are introduced into the environment, they create a blanketing effect, right, that traps heat in. So the more fossil fuels we burn, the more layers we are adding to this blanket, right, and the bigger this problem is. So the blanket is actually a metaphor, right? So the metaphor is making choices about what to emphasize and de-emphasize in the science of climate change. So just like if you enjoy episodes of Star Trek and there's a terrible problem in engineering and Geordi is trying to explain to everyone how they're going to fix the problem, and they have to use a simple metaphor to ensure that everyone can understand. So using the blanket metaphor focuses on carbon dioxide buildup as the most significant factor contributing to temperature rise and the use of fossil fuels. And then it establishes that the problem is really putting agency on humans and the fact that we are burning fossil fuels, right? And it makes humans accountable for our actions, right? It's saying this is happening because of something we do. So it really centers human action in the conversation. And putting these ideas together makes it clear that reducing, the only way we're going to be able to stop this is to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, right? So it takes away from that kind of individualism behind like, oh, well, I recycle, so it's fine. You know, we're really talking about this as a global problem using this metaphor. I do always like to show, these are really great slides that were put together by my colleague, Rachel Kangas, to cover climate science as part of FPAN's Heritage Monitoring Scouts program. And I just like to show these to people. You certainly don't want to drown people in science, but I do think it is helpful to show where we are today in terms of carbon dioxide versus where we are in the past. And then also to discuss how climate scientists put this information all together, right? So how do we use carbon levels as, what is the relationship between carbon levels, global temperatures, and sea levels, right? What does that look like in action, right? So what this might look like when I talk to someone, I promise I won't read the whole thing. You all can read it with a hot pink background if it doesn't blind you. So we want to start with a big cause, right? Why is climate change happening? So climate change is happening because we burn fossil fuels. Then we add this metaphor, right? So we're talking about the excess carbon dioxide, connect the dots between carbon dioxide levels and sea levels. And for us here in Florida, I would typically connect it with increased strength, severity, and frequency of hurricanes, right? Then we introduce the problem, right? So locally here in Florida, following Hurricane Nicole, Martin County saw severe erosion that is then impacting these archaeological sites as well as the coastal infrastructure, right? So this is what's at stake. So we're walking people through all of the steps in this chain to get to what's at stake and why this matters. And remember that this is where understanding your audience is going to come into play, and think about those cultural mindsets that we want to steer people towards. So we want to steer people towards collective, productive action on climate change. We can use a couple of different values to encourage the most number of people to get on board with what we're trying to say. So this is a shared value, right? So the value of protection. That indicates we have a duty to safeguard the well-being of people and places. So these are some different bullet points that we have to facilitate people thinking about this idea of protection, right? We must protect and preserve the habitats and ecosystems we depend on. Showing concern for others is the right thing to do. Stepping in to ensure people's safety and well-being, taking measures to eliminate or to reduce risks, and trying to be vigilant in shielding people and places from harm. So these values are commonly held values. So an idea that showing concern for others is the right thing to do is a value that most people share in the United States. It may not always seem that way, but it's a commonly held value, right? That we should help people out, that we should do the right thing, that we should work together. So appealing to this sense of protection is going to help facilitate a productive climate conversation. Another value we can use to encourage a great climate change conversation is the idea of responsible management, right? So responsible management says that taking common sense steps today is in the interest of future generations. And we want to encourage this at a great generational level rather than specific families or individuals, right? We want to stay away from that individual mindset. So this can include ideas like, hey, let's be responsible when it comes to the environment. Let's look ahead to handle problems before they get worse. Responsible managers keep an open mind, look to evidence, and take a level-headed, step-by-step approach. And future generations depend on the decisions we make today. So I think that over Thanksgiving, we have a really unique time to go home to our friends and family, maybe friends we haven't seen in a while or family members we haven't seen in a while, and try and practice with these different values. So practice with this value of protection and this value of responsible management to see how including those shared values into explanations of what you do or why you care about climate change will encourage people to sympathize and come on board with what you're saying and not alienate people, right? Again, I was really inspired to create this talk because I know I'm often guilty of getting frustrated during a heated discussion and saying something extremely mature along the lines of, well, I know more than you do, so like nothing you say matters, or producing more and more scientific charts or scientific data to try and communicate my point. And that's really not going to be effective in talking to people, right? That's only going to make people shut down and not pay attention to what I am saying. So now the most important part of this, of your climate story and of your climate communication, is conveying the idea of what you can do to help, right? So what can we do to help solve this problem so people are not walking away with a doom and gloom attitude, right? So remember our cultural mindsets map about these different areas to try and stay away from. One of the interesting ones that we might fall into sometimes as archaeologists is talking about the economic value of something, whether it's an archaeological site that where tourists are visiting it and there's a dollar amount behind the site, right? But obviously the site is so much more than that dollar amount. So we want to try and stay away, again, from those ideas. So when we talk about what we do to help, we want to lean in, right? And when I say lean in, I mean lean into community-based and community-led solutions. Emphasize the importance of collective action versus the actions of the individual, right? So we want to avoid focusing on individual action. So stay away from things like reducing your personal carbon footprint and recycling. Not because these are bad things to do, like please keep recycling, please keep trying to reduce your carbon footprint. Please don't stop doing these things. However, in your conversations, it's important to focus on what we all need to come together to do with climate change, right? So FPAN's Heritage Monitoring Scouts is a really great example of a community-based solution because we are addressing this problem of multiple archaeological sites being impacted by climate change in Florida. And we are using the community to try and document these sites and figure out a solution for how to address this problem, right? So community gardens are a solution. Increased public transportation could be a solution, right? It's better to focus on let's lobby to get better public transportation versus I will just drive fewer miles with my car. Again, it's not that it's bad to reduce your carbon footprint, but it's not going to be the most effective approach to not only building a community, but also to long-term address the issues and try and mitigate the impacts of climate change. So remember the keys to a productive conversation. How does climate change, how does climate change work? So explain climate change. Try to explain it in a way that's going to emphasize human action and human agency. Explain why it matters and explain what we can do to help. So I hope you all are still paying attention and still awake. I'm going to ask Sarah if she could create our breakout rooms again, and then we can actually practice using these stories to talk about something that matters to us, whether it's an archaeological site or some other way that some other aspect of our community that climate change is impacting.
All right, I have the rooms ready. What's our assignment again? Because I'm going to ask that question when I get into our room.
Awesome. So so everyone, please tell your climate story, practice your climate change conversation using these three key facts. So how does climate change work? Why does it matter? And what we can do to help.